I woke up to a miracle today. Triggers fade as I find my way. No judgment to lead astray. In this peaceful state I'll stay.
Welcome back to A Course in Miracles in Practice.
It's good to be here. We should probably mention, I know we're a bit behind schedule for our listeners. We were out of town for a few days.
Right, and things on my end have been, well, a bit hectic. But we always want to make sure the same care goes into every single one of these. You know, a late episode is much better than a rushed one.
Especially with this material, we so appreciate everyone's patience and all the amazing feedback and questions you've been sending. It's been fantastic.
It really has. And today, we're focusing on Lesson 330, which is, I will not hurt myself again today.
And this lesson feels like a summation, gathering all the threads from the last 10 days of practice and pulling them into this one very clear, very actionable statement.
The message is so direct. The suffering we feel is, in fact, self-inflicted because we keep choosing a false identity. And the good news is, we can stop.
That's the mission for our discussion today, isn't it? To really get into that mechanism of self-hurt. What does the Course even mean by this injury?
And why do we seem so, I guess, addicted to it?
Yeah.
And most importantly, how can we practice choosing differently in those small, immediate moments of our day?
Before we jump into that, if you want to share your own experiences with this or you have questions, you can always find us on social media. We are at the World Harmony Project.
That's on TikTok and YouTube as well. And you can always email us at acim@theworldharmonyproject.org.
Okay, so this lesson, it really asks us to look squarely at the pain we generate from the inside.
I think the best way to start is to ground ourselves in the text itself.
Agreed. I think I've got my coffee. I'm ready.
I'll begin the reading. Lesson 330. I will not hurt myself again today. Let us this day accept forgiveness as our only function. Why should we attack our minds and give them images of pain? Why should we teach them they are powerless when God holds out his power and his love and bids them take what is already theirs? The mind that is made willing to accept God's gifts has been restored to spirit and extends its freedom and its joy, as is the will of God united with its own. The self which God created cannot sin and therefore cannot suffer. Let us choose today that he be our identity and thus escape forever from all things the dream of fear appears to offer us.
And the final prayer. Father, your Son cannot be hurt. And if we think we suffer, we but fail to know our one identity we share with you. We would return to it today to be made free forever from all our mistakes and to be saved from what we thought we were.
You know, it's interesting where this lesson falls. Its placement isn't an accident, is it? It's right at the end of this 10-day sequence in part 2.
Not at all. The Course is so methodical. It builds a foundation before it delivers a conclusion, and Lesson 330 is definitely a conclusion.
And that foundation, that preparation, it's been about hammering home this distinction between our true self, the one God created, whole and complete, and this fragile self-concept we've built.
Right, the one made out of fear and guilt and the belief that we're separate. We just came from lessons like, Father, my freedom is in you alone, and I can give up, but what was never real.
It's been this continuous theme.
Mm-hmm.
Your true identity is unified with God. It's eternal, changeless. Everything else is just a fabrication.
A story. A narrative we constructed in our minds. And what this lesson does with that very blunt title is show us the consequence of choosing that story.
The consequence is that it hurts. It takes this big abstract idea about identity and makes it intensely personal. It says you are actively injuring yourself every single time you reinforce that story of inadequacy or guilt.
It connects all those high-level concepts, atonement, the self, the ego, directly to what you feel emotionally day to day. If you're feeling anxious or small or full of regret, it's because in that moment, you chose to be the self that can feel those things.
So we're not just stuck with a false identity. We're actively maintaining it, moment by moment.
And the maintenance is the pain. That's what the Course is defining as hurt here. It's not an external event. It's not a bad day at work. It's not traffic.
It's the specific internal act of accepting an identity built on the belief that we are separate from love, that acceptance is the spiritual injury.
That is such a crucial point because someone could read, "I'll not hurt myself again today," and think it means, I'll stop my negative self-talk or I'll avoid a risky situation. And those things are fine, but that's not the level it's talking about.
It's talking about a metaphysical injury. The true self, the self God created, is impervious. It can't be attacked, it cannot sin, and it can't suffer loss. It's outside of all of that.
And I think that's where the real challenge is for us in our practice, because when suffering appears, when there's a loss or a betrayal or some kind of hardship, it feels absolutely real. It feels undeniable.
It's hard to accept the premise that our suffering is caused only by the identity we choose and not by the event itself.
It requires a radical shift. So an event happens, it's neutral. But if the immediate interpretation we put on it is, "This proves I'm unworthy," or "See, this confirms I'm vulnerable," that interpretation is the self-inflicted wound.
That's the image of pain the lesson talks about. We're feeding our minds this image based on the ego's framework of guilt and separation.
And the moment we choose that framework, the identity of the one who is guilty or vulnerable, we are, in the Course's terms, attacking our own minds. We're choosing to believe in the ego's limitations instead of the limitless self God created.
It's a rejection of reality. And that rejection is the experience of suffering.
The lesson asks it so directly. Why should we teach them they are powerless when God holds out his power and his love and bids them take what is already theirs?
And we teach our minds powerlessness every time we say, "I am defined by this mistake," or "I am limited by this body," or "I am at the mercy of this circumstance."
The ego's whole game is to convince us that we have to accept that powerlessness to survive in the world. It frames fear as a necessary protection.
But the Course flips that completely. It says that so-called protection is the source of all our pain. The mind that accepts powerlessness is immediately cut off from its true state of union with God's will.
And it's restored to spirit only when it's willing to accept God's gifts, which just means accepting its true identity. And from that identity, suffering is literally impossible.
Which brings us to the function the lesson gives us for the day. Let us this day accept forgiveness as our only function. This is how we break the cycle.
This is such a critical redefinition of forgiveness. It's not about letting someone else off the hook for what they did.
Not at all. Forgiveness in the Course means recognizing that the separation from God never actually happened, that sin is impossible, and therefore the identity we made up, the one that could be guilty and could suffer, is not real.
So forgiveness is the act of releasing our belief in that fearful, separate self. It's an internal correction of identity. When we choose forgiveness as our function, we're just choosing to remember who we are over and over.
When the lesson asks, why should we attack our minds and give them images of pain? We have to understand that the image of pain isn't just one bad thought.
No, it's the entire picture of the ego self. That self is, by its very definition, an image of pain. It was born from the belief in separation, which is the origin of all guilt.
If you think about the ego's structure, it's built on these pillars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Separation, which creates guilt, guilt, which demands punishment, and vulnerability, which anticipates pain.
So any thought we have that validates one of those pillars is feeding our mind an image of pain. Every time we obsess over a perceived flaw, we're validating vulnerability and separation. We are literally constructing pain.
That's why this lesson is so important as a summary. It's telling us we can stop the construction project.
Yeah.
We can just put down the tools. We can choose the self that is already whole and innocent.
A self that doesn't need to be earned or fixed or protected. It just is.
And if the whole ego structure is an image of pain, then the only way out is to choose the true self. Because that self cannot sin and therefore cannot suffer.
It's the ultimate escape clause. We escape forever from all things the dream of fear appears to offer us simply by making that choice of identity today. But it's not a one-and-done deal.
No, it's a continuous practice. It's returning to that choice every time the ego's story tries to take over our perception.
Which is why that phrase again today is maybe the most practical part of the whole lesson. It acknowledges the lifetime of habit we're up against.
The goal isn't perfection. It's just willingness. Willingness to choose again right now.
Okay, so we've kind of laid out the framework here. Let's bring this down to the ground level because the temptation to hurt ourselves happens in these tiny millisecond thoughts, often disguised as something useful.
Absolutely. They can seem like rational consideration or even productive planning.
A super common one, I think we've all been there, is in social interactions, especially when there's ambiguity. So, for example, you send a text to a friend or a partner, and the reply you get back is really brief or just flat in tone. And the ego mind immediately fills that vacuum with fear. The first thought isn't, oh, they must be busy, or maybe they're driving.
No, the instantaneous interpretation is they're upset with me. I did something wrong. What did I say?
And that leap to self-blame, that is lesson 330 in action. In that split second, you have chosen to accept the identity built on guilt. The one who causes harm, the one who's responsible for another person's emotions.
One who is inherently defective and has to be constantly monitored.
And once you choose that identity, the suffering is immediate, the stress response kicks in, your mind starts racing, replaying everything you said, looking for the evidence of your sin.
You are literally attacking your mind by feeding it a fearful narrative based on absolutely nothing but an assumption of your own guilt.
And then the consequences ripple outward, don't they? We start acting from that painful identity we've chosen. We might pull back and go silent to sort of punish ourselves preemptively.
Or the opposite. We might send a flurry of follow-up text. Are you okay? Did I say something? Are we good?
Uh-huh.
A panicked attempt at correction.
And all of that is an attempt to fix a pain that we generated internally. The flat tone of the text didn't cause the pain. Our choice of the guilty identity caused the pain.
And the self, which God created, that self doesn't need to decode text messages to know its worth. Its worth is eternal. The self-hurt is in that moment we forget this and make our peace conditional on someone else's mood.
The practice here is just to notice the thought, to see this is a fear interpretation, and to pause before you accept the identity of the guilty party.
Let's take another one. A purely internal scenario, the endless loop of regret.
Oh, this is a big one. Replaying mistakes from the past, sometimes from decades ago. Something awkward you said in a meeting last week, or a decision you made in your 20s that seems foolish now.
You run it through the mental projector again and again, with this harsh commentary track playing over it. I should have known better. That was so stupid. They must think I'm an idiot.
It feels like we're doing something necessary, like self-correction or analysis, but the Course would call it self-flagellation.
Because when you're in that loop, you are actively choosing and reinforcing the identity of someone who needs to be corrected, who constantly falls short, who is defined by their past mistakes.
You're teaching your mind that its value is based on a standard of performance that you failed to meet. And the suffering is that gap between the perceived failure and the perfect image of what you think you should have been.
That is another perfect example of giving your mind an image of pain. You're withholding the truth of your own innocence.
The alternative identity, the self God created, sees those past events as things that happened. They were errors in form, maybe, but they carry no inherent guilt or sin. That self cannot be diminished by an awkward comment.
This one takes so much discipline because the ego screams that if you stop beating yourself up, you'll just repeat the mistake. It sells guilt as a motivator for improvement.
But the practice of Lesson 330 is to realize that true correction comes from accepting your innocence, not from magnifying your fault. You choose to stop the loop, recognizing that the replay is not reflection, it's an attack.
Okay, a third one. The anticipation of conflict. This happens a lot when you know you need to have a difficult conversation or set a boundary.
Before the conversation even starts, you've already rehearsed it in your mind. And in your imaginary version, it always goes badly. They get angry, they're disappointed, you feel rejected or have to scramble to defend yourself.
This preemptive anxiety is such a clear example of hurting ourselves before the world has even had a chance to. We're choosing to live in a future that we've defined by our own vulnerability and failure.
The belief underneath that rehearsal is that our true self, our honest needs, our simple truth is somehow dangerous or unacceptable. That if we're honest, we'll be attacked. So we accept the identity that needs to be hidden, that needs protection.
the identity that can be threatened by honesty. And that choice is the self-infliction. We give our mind an image of pain, the pain of a rejection that hasn't even happened, and we suffer the physical and mental stress of that imagined threat right now.
If we were coming from our true self, we'd know that expressing a need or a truth, regardless of the response, can't diminish our worth or harm our identity. Their response is their business.
Yeah.
Our business is our own peace.
So the suffering in this case is the feeling of being perpetually under threat. The lesson is the way out. We are not that vulnerable ego self that needs to hide.
And one more, which I think is very common, the pain that comes from conditional worth, measuring ourselves by to-do lists and accomplishments.
This really comes into focus at the end of the day, doesn't it? Look back at your list of things you wanted to get done, and you focus only on what's still unchecked.
You see the laundry you didn't do, the project you didn't finish, the workout you skipped, and the mind uses that as evidence to build a case against you. You're not disciplined. You're falling behind. You're a failure.
That is a direct attack. We are teaching our minds that they are powerless, and we are denying the gifts of love and power that God has already given us. We've tied our eternal value to temporary, measurable outcomes.
And the Course just keeps reminding us, your worth is not earned. It is a given. The self which God created is never on trial, is never judged by a checklist.
The suffering here is that feeling of constant striving, of never being enough. If we can just remember that our worth is already total, then the tasks just become tasks. They're not referendums on our value.
What's so important across all of these scenarios, the text, the regret, the fear, the checklist, is that the lesson isn't asking us to get better at managing the external stuff.
Right. It's not about becoming a better texter or finishing your to-do list.
It's about noticing the identity you accept during those events. Because the acceptance of the false self, that is the mechanism of the hurt. So if this self-concept feels so real, especially when we get triggered, how do we practically interrupt that momentum? It's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to do it when your heart is racing.
That's where, again, today is just so helpful. It lowers the stakes. You're not trying to achieve some kind of permanent, instantaneous enlightenment.
You're just committing to the choice right now. You acknowledge you'll probably slip in 5 minutes, but you are willing to return to the choice again.
The whole practice becomes about recognition. Can I catch the ego story? Can I recognize that fearful voice and step back before it runs the show?
When that feeling hits, the guilt, the inadequacy, you can stop and ask yourself, am I giving my mind an image of pain right now?
That question creates the space. It's the holy instant. It's the gap between the stimulus and your choice. And in that space, in that moment of observation, you can remember your unified self. You can see the ego's interpretation for what it is, just an offer, an illusion of separation, and you can politely decline.
This practice really is the path to freedom. We realize we are not victims of the world. We are only victims of our own chosen interpretations.
This lesson truly does bring the whole 10-day sequence together.
We've talked about where this happens, in small interactions, in old memories, in imagined conversations, and in our lists of unfinished tasks. In all of them, the ego is just trying to keep the story of fear alive.
And the suffering we feel isn't just a side effect. It is the direct result of choosing the identity that can suffer. The self which God created remains untouched, peaceful, and whole.
Our only function, then, is forgiveness, the ongoing willingness to release our belief in that separate self.
So if there's one realization to carry from today, it's this. You have the agency to stop feeding your mind narratives that work against your peace. You can pause, take a breath, and choose the self that God created, the one that cannot be harmed.
When you feel that familiar rush of inadequacy or guilt or fear rising up, just try to see it for what it is, an image of pain being offered to you. Recognize you're about to choose the identity that can be hurt. And then just choose differently.
We want to leave you with a phrase to carry into your practice today, a simple commitment to that choice.
I release the story that hurts my mind. I choose the self that cannot be harmed.
Thank you for practicing with us today. We hope this exploration brings you greater peace.